All right, welcome everyone. So I'm happy to welcome you on this stream live, hosting you on the session around obtaining accurate carbon valuation. I'm here together with Balen from Rabobank and Arjen Vrielink from Satelligence. I'll be moderating the session. I'm Colette Grosscurt from EY, and yeah, we're very eager to get a nice interactive session around this topic. But before we go into that, I will give a short moment for the speakers to introduce themselves, so you know who we are and you have an idea of whom you'll be talking to. So maybe I'll shortly give the floor to Paul. Do you want to introduce yourself shortly?
Sure. Thanks, Colette. First of all, great being here, and thanks for the opportunity to share what we are doing at Rabobank in terms of carbon, agroforestry, etc. But first, about myself. My name is Paul van Balen. I joined Rabobank roughly 2 years ago. Personally, I have a background in consulting. I worked for Accenture for a long time, and then I joined Rabobank 2 years ago to work for the strategy and innovation department. And at Rabobank, we have launched a innovation strategy some 2 years ago. And the proposition that I will be talking about today is stems from that innovation strategy. I'm so happy to talk to you about that and tell you everything about it.
Great, thanks. Then handing it on to Arjen.
Thank you, Colette. So my name is Arjen Vrielink. I'm one of the two directors of Satelligence. We're a scale-up, a small company from Utrecht in the Netherlands, and we are a remote sensing service provider specializing in deforestation monitoring in the context of soft agricultural commodity supply chains, and now also moving into the carbon and biomass measuring and sequence modeling field. Satelligence was founded in 2016. I joined in 2017, and Satelligence was founded specifically with the private sector in mind. So the remote sensing field in itself is quite young and immature still, and leaning towards grants, subsidies, and pilot kind of funding. And we really wanted to set up a professional company servicing the private sector. So that's also why we're excited to be here in these kind of contexts to address and see where we are now as a sector, as a company, and also in partnerships like with Rabobank.
Great, thanks for your intros. Well, I'll shortly introduce myself. So I'm Colette Grosscurt. I work as a manager at EY, one of the larger professional services companies. I'm part of the climate change and sustainability services team there, where we work together with clients on sustainability strategies, impact measurements, integrated reporting, sustainability reporting, lots of different topics in various industries, and also the carbon and net zero topics we see coming by quite a lot of times. So yeah, very interested in learning a bit more about what's been happening in this space and yeah, where this may be going in the future as well. So yeah, firstly, I would like to ask Paul, how is it going with Acorn? I think your initiative from Rabobank. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, so we launched the Acorn project some 1.5 years ago. I think it's a super cool project, and dying to tell you more about it. So maybe a bit about Rabobank first. I'm not sure if all participants are familiar with Rabobank, a Dutch bank of origin. It is a cooperative bank founded some 100 years ago, and a bank that has always been very strong in food and agri. Our motto is growing a better world together, and we have a leadership that is very keen to make a contribution to making the world a bit of a better place. That combined with our innovation strategy in our wholesale rural department means that we are exploring new propositions in this context. One of those propositions is indeed Project Acorn, and what it is based on is pretty much we enable smallholder farmers in developing countries to switch to a new form of agriculture that allows them to grow trees, and those trees sequester carbon. We monitor the growth of the trees over time, and we allow corporates to compensate their unavoidable emissions by buying carbon removal units. That's in the basis the idea of the Acorn proposition. So, as you may be aware, the world has roughly 500 million smallholder farmers, and these people are particularly hit by climate change. But they're also challenged to produce ever more food in the areas that they are located in. So on the one hand, they are challenged, but more is requested of them. Their income is continuously under pressure, but they also have other challenges. For example, the biodiversity of their land is under threat, because they typically grow one type of crop, which is not good for the land, not good for their income, because prices may be under pressure. It's not good for their nutrition. So all sorts of downsides of the way that they typically do agriculture. A better idea is to do intercropping, and an even better idea is to do that in a form of something that is known as agroforestry. So the mix of trees with traditional crops that has all sorts of benefits, both for nature, for the climate, as well as for water management, but also for nutrition and for income. Risk management is a topic, as one crop may not produce the yield that you want in a given year. The other crop or the other tree may balance that out. So there's all sorts of reasons why agroforestry is a much better idea for a farmer himself, but also for nature as a whole. So what we try to do is we try to enable those farmers to make a switch to what they used to do, to this form of agriculture known as agroforestry. So we help them plant the trees among the traditional crops that they are planting. That can be coffee, can be maize, can be a different type of crop. And as we help them plant or grow the trees, they may have already done that. They of course store carbon with the growth of those trees. And what we do is that carbon storage, we market that to the corporates, as I mentioned before. What we typically do differently than other such initiatives is that we sell ex-post carbon removal units. So we only sell a carbon removal unit once the tree has grown. So we're not making a promise saying we will plant a tree for you and we will, we will do that at some point, and then we sell the carbon removal unit once the tree has grown. So year on year, as the biomass increases, we sell what we have already sequestered in the system. We typically do this for smallholder farmers, not for big farmers, because the business case is much more interesting for smallholder farmers. A relatively small amount of money that can be made off of this can be, in percentage, a huge increase in their income. And it's also great that we enable smallholder farmers to enter the market for carbon, whereas they previously couldn't do that. And that is pretty much where Arjen's story comes in, because we want to do this at a huge scale. So we're not talking about 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 farmers. No, our ambition is really to take this big and to try to onboard millions of farmers. In developing countries, we are already active in some of the developing countries. But we need to keep costs of monitoring down. So as the trees grow year on year, we want to monitor how are they growing, and we want to, of course, measure the amount of carbon that has been sequestered in the trees, so that we know how much carbon removal units we can sell to the market. That monitoring is typically a very expensive and labor-intensive process, because you actually have to go out to the field, measure the trees, measure the DBH, determine how much carbon has been stored, and only then can you determine, hey, this is the amount of carbon that we can sell to the market. That's of course not feasible. That would be too expensive, way too labor intensive. So we have been searching for a way to do this with technology. And so we have scanned the market for quite some time to find parties who could help us with this, who could actually measure the biomass increase year on year with a certain degree of accuracy so that we can make it transparent to the market. This is actually what we have measured. You're not just buying a promise, you're buying actual carbon sequestration. And that's how we got in touch with Satelligence. They have provided us with that technology. Maybe Arjen, this is a good, unless of course there are any questions about my story, but maybe that's a good time to switch over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Colette, if you let me, I'll have then a short follow-up on Paul's story. So thank you, Paul, for the clear introduction. Maybe to be fair, we're not the only remote sensing provider to the Acorn project. We're a team of providers. So currently we are with 2 remote sensing providers. The other one is being Space for Good. And we deliver exactly the same products. This is a way to strengthen the sector, but also a way to spread risk from the Rabobank side, which I think is a good thing. So to get a bit into what Paul is talking about, so he touched upon some interesting points already, but maybe first a small rewind to what we do actually, and what we like our most successful product until now has been deforestation monitoring, and we're really good at that, and we can scale it to global scale, and we're selling that to big parties in supply chain actors and stakeholders. But deforestation monitoring you could see as a kind of a negative way of looking at the forest. So you're looking at what is disappearing. And what is interesting, and I think also what is needed now is, well, to save the planet, or at least to give the planet a chance, is also look at initiatives and programs that are actually re-sequestering and rebuilding forests and carbon and biomass. And that is exactly what Acorn is doing. So for us, this is also quite a natural transition at what we're doing at the core of our business. So we're looking at tropical forests and where they don't disappear, but now we're adding services where we say, how can we restore, how can we reintroduce carbon stores in landscapes? So that is a little bit of context, and also a kind of well, coincidence doesn't exist, but it feels like that we found each other at the good spot in time. So remote sensing, as Paul mentioned, the real big strength of remote sensing, and then I mean satellite-based remote sensing, is that you can scale and scale very big. So if you are interested in the growth of a strawberry plant in your back garden, don't hire us, don't look at remote sensing, because just look out of your window, you know best, and then there's no one who can do it more detailed than you. But you get into a problem if you want to scan all the strawberry fields of the whole neighborhood, then it's already getting tricky. And then if you want to do your whole city, your province, or your country, then it gets out of hand really quickly. And that's where remote sensing really shines. So we can do with satellite images, we can monitor whole countries, whole landscapes, and even whole continents. And when you start doing that, you can scale down costs very quickly. So there's then 2 things to the remote sensing. Because of the scale, the marginal costs go down very quickly. So you can do the per unit cost, get them very low. But on the other hand, and that's something related to accuracy, that's you're looking for a consistent and coherent results and data. You can imagine that if you send in field teams all over the world, you do get very precise results maybe, but maybe they all have a little bit of a different method. Maybe they use different equipment. Maybe the weather was different. Maybe the species were a little bit different. So you get back data which seems to be very precise, but very inconsistent and incoherent. So you can't really compare the data to each other. And once remote sensing comes in, once you build a model, you can scale to very large areas, and then maybe the local accuracy or precision will not be as accurate as a field team. It will be very consistent. So the accuracy and the errors you make are very consistent. And what's more, and Paul also highlighted that, and I think this is a very important thing to stress, is that in the Acorn project, you're not actually interested in the absolute biomass stock value, but in the delta, so in the difference, so how much biomass is sequestered. So even if you pick an allometric equation or your model is off by 10 or 20%, as long as it's consistently off by that number, still you have an accurate difference measurement. So you will still have an accurate measurement for the delta, and the delta is exactly the carbon reduction unit that Project Acorn is selling. So we think remote sensing is a perfect match in this case. That doesn't mean that it's a seamless integration. So the integration is a journey of exploring new worlds on many different levels. And I think the technical problems are even the easiest to solve. The more challenging problems is context, jargon, definitions, learning each other's language. So there's also a whole world to gain there. And therefore, it's very important that we, as a, let's say, tech-savvy, a bit of a Silicon Valley startup vibe, get to work with more conservative industries like financial institutions, because this is really where the future is.
Great, thanks both. I think this is already a great setting of the scene that you've been going into over the past couple of years. I think it's really interesting to hear some of the challenges that you've maybe already tackled and that you're still facing, but also to learn a bit about the really cool benefits that this both this technology and this way of carbon removal units, programming, let's say, works. So I think we received already one question from the audience. It would be great if we can zoom in on that one, I think, because it's probably on the top of several people's minds. So the question is, when you monitor huge swaths of forest, what's the amount of validation data necessary to actually verify that data? And like, how often do you take surveys, and does it differ from the location that you're measuring this in? I think, Paul, you are you're well suited to provide an answer.
Yeah, so the reason why I asked to pick up this question, Colette, it's actually, I think, technically more in Arjen's corner, but I guess there is an element to this one that is really related to the proposition. So I think it's important to mention that we are measuring the individual plots of land. So we are not measuring huge areas of forest. No, we are measuring each and every farmer's plot of land. And when I say plot of land, I'm talking 1 hectare, sometimes less, 1 to 5 hectares of land. So it's important to us that a farmer that has made the switch to agroforestry also gets the benefits of that directly. So if this farmer, let's say, generates an additional 5 tons of biomass in a given year because he has taken care of his trees and the rest of his crop, that means that he has generated 5, because 1 ton is 1 carbon removal unit, he is entitled to receive the value of 5 carbon removal units. And as Rabobank, we are, of course, the party between the smallholder farmer and the corporate who wants to buy that carbon removal unit, but the money flows back to the smallholder farmer. So it is on an individual farmer level that we measure the biomass increase, so delta, as Arjen calls it, year on year, not on a big piece of land. That's what makes it so super challenging.
Great,
and with regards to, and maybe to add to really answer the question, what we have been doing with Arjen, with Satelligence and Space for Good, we have gone out to the field. I think we started in Brazil, and we've collected data for, I think it was 100 plots of land in Brazil. So we went there, we counted all the trees, we did all of the DBH measurements, we determined the tree species, etc., etc. Then, based on traditional methods, we calculated the biomass on that plot of land. And we collected all of the data, combined it with LiDAR data and other sources of information. Then we shared it with Satelligence and Space for Good and said, can you please build a model for us based on this information so that we can scale this up and we don't need to go out to the field anymore, but we can do it based on your model. In other words, remote sensing only.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think it's indeed interesting to hear how you maybe see this going forward. Like, I think you also mentioned that you will do recurring checks, also indeed depending on different types of ecosystems, different countries, maybe to validate that going forward. And maybe Arjen, or yeah, I don't know who wants to take that a bit more.
Yeah, maybe to highlight a bit, because we do not for this particular case, for the Acorn case, but we do monitor huge swaths of forest. And maybe to highlight two things. One, forest is here dropped as a universal term, like everybody knows what forest is, but there can be, for example, a primary undisturbed tropical forest, which is something completely different than the forest trees that we're measuring for Acorn. So those are human-introduced shadow agroforestry trees in an agricultural setting. So we're both monitoring trees, but it's both completely different ecosystems. And for the first ecosystem, so the primary forest, maybe counterintuitively, that's actually quite easy, because a primary forest ecosystem is super stable through time, already for thousands of years. So once you have a small sample, for example, of the Amazon or in Southeast Asia, and you tuned your algorithm to that sample, you're pretty certain that you have an accurate reading over the whole area, over the whole country, so to say.
I think, Colette, the question that we've received, are the smallholders able to use the tree later on for fuel wood or sell on the timber? I think that's super interesting. It's a question that we get a lot, of course, because what's the point if you pay out these farmers and they chop down the tree the next day, or how much carbon has really been sequestered? And of course, that's something that we're taking into consideration. So on to Arjen's point, these farmers are not just planting trees, right? They're planting interesting trees in the sense that they are fruit producing trees, nut producing trees, avocado, etc. So they are actually trees that have a function for them. Sometimes they are shadow trees, which in turn result in more yield on the underlying crop. So it is not in the farmer's best interest to chop the tree down, because the tree will no longer produce fruit or whatever the tree produces, or it will no longer have that function of that it has in the agroforestry system. So it's not in the farmer's best interest to do that. And mind you, we sell ex-post carbon removal units. So we only sell what has already been sequestered. Now, if a farmer does so decide that he wants to chop down a tree for which he has already received a payout, we have a buffer pool in place, meaning that if Arjen or Space for Good tells us, hey, we see a deforestation on this plot of land, so apparently there has been some trees have been chopped down, we need to revert to our buffer pool and we need to compensate or replace the carbon removal unit that we have sold to the market with something that we hold in stock. And in that way, we make sure that there is no, let's say, a false payout or carbon removal units sold to the market. In all honesty, that buffer pool has its limits, so we have to prevent the farmer from wanting to cut down his tree in the first place. Should it happen, or in case of a fire or other calamity, we have this buffer pool in place to be able to replace that unit.
Great. Yeah, I think it's a great question indeed, because it's the natural role of a farmer, right? To have a certain life cycle of their agricultural goods. So yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind when designing these systems. I think we're getting more interesting questions from the audience as well. One is a bit more technical. It's asking around what's the resolution of tree monitoring you're looking at. Are you also able to monitor single trees? I think, Arjen, you already mentioned a little bit in your intro story, that it's not very useful to look at your strawberry plant outside of your garden, but maybe you can give a bit more detail on some of the other projects that you're looking at.
Yeah, so currently we're using, and this is also one of the reasons why this can be an economically viable service, because of course, as Paul said, there's money made with selling of the CRUs, and part of that money goes back to the farmer, most of that money, but also part of that money goes to the bank for maintaining the platform and setting it up, and also part of that money goes to us, the remote sensing provider. And if we are currently using open source, open data, and if we would have to resort to commercial data, our prices would be order of magnitude higher, so tenfold higher. And the open data that we are using is from the Copernicus and Lancet programs, which is typically between 10 to 30 meters in pixel size, which means that you cannot see individual trees, but you can see the fields. And in some very rare exceptions, you can see shade trees, but that's only by inference, so you can't really directly see the tree growing. So there are commercial data providers available where you can, for example, see 30 centimeter or 1 meter pixel size, where you can distinguish individual trees, but those would not be available for the operational scalable service. So we could use these data to do, for example, the model building or validation and calibration of the models, but we don't use them operationally. One other source of data that we use, and this is super high resolution, and that's Airborne Lidar, which is a laser scanner based on an airplane, and it scans now I have to say this right. So there's a terrain model and a surface model. So you get a model of the trees, the tree height. So then you can really see individual tree crowns. And we use that data both to validate the ground truth data, the training data that is collected in the field by partners, and to improve the data modeling parts. So we use a variety of sources, but the operational scalable part is based on 10 to 30 meter resolution satellite data.
Arjen, can I pick up the question about the certification body? Proud to announce that very recently we have received the go on, or we are certified under Plan Vivo. So there's pretty much 3 major bodies out there. It's Vera, it's Gold Standard, and Plan Vivo is a bit of a smaller one, but I think they're on the rise. And we decided to go for Plan Vivo because we believe in their philosophy. And after a lot of hard work and a lot of processes, our methodology, which is actually quite new and innovative, has been approved by Plan Vivo. So the carbon removal units that we put out on the market are certified. And the other question from Maarten de Haan, the average percentage of increased income, a very good question. Of course, the farmer makes the switch from what he's doing right now to something else. And mind you, we are not only dealing with what we call new agroforestry farmers, but we are also, and specifically now, because we're in the beginning of this proposition, dealing with farmers who have already made the switch to agroforestry, but meet the criteria of additionality, etc. So the percentage of loss for those new farmers, actually what you could say is that they go through what we sometimes refer to as the valley of death. So they lose their current income, and they have to recover from that and get on top once they have the new agroforestry system in place. And of course, I mean, we're talking about smallholder farmers that make $1,000 USD per year, or 2, or sometimes 5, but so they cannot, of course, cover for that income loss for as the trees grow. So we have to cater for that. We have to facilitate the possibility for those farmers to make that switch from what they're doing today to the now, we are a bank, you might say, so you finance that. We do not finance that ourselves, but we finance that with partners. So we find possibilities for those farmers to bridge that valley of death, to cover for their income loss, but ultimately to address Martin's question, how much, what is the percentage income increase? It is, we count on roughly 20%. Of income increase. And mind you, it comes with a lot of other benefits as well. nutrition, as I mentioned, biodiversity, etc., etc. We've spoken to a lot of these smallholder farmers over the last 1.5 years, and it's really interesting to hear that they are feeling the consequences of climate change. They are talking about higher temperatures, more flooding, more droughts. They're feeling it. So they see the necessity to make changes like these as well.
Great, thanks. I think we've already touched upon a lot of interesting topics through all the questions from the audience. I think one of the things that stuck to me as well is that you mentioned, Arjen, is that there's still a long way to go to get to the same kind of definitions and the same kind of understanding on certain topics. Do you feel that, and also maybe from the Rabobank side of point of view, like in terms of getting to carbon removal units as a standardized measure of way of dealing with this, this type of financing? What are your thoughts on this going forward? Do you see there's a sector-wide interest in developing these definitions? Do you see collaborations coming up, or what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, maybe. So this is a very broad topic. So maybe just some highlights. But I think so. Carbon is now rising. You could even, I would say, carbon is becoming the new sustainability currency. You could see it as that. And this is one sign of that is because there's markets being made for carbon. One of the, I think, challenges still is with these carbon markets that a lot of the markets are voluntarily, and there are not yet like universally or globally accepted standards or certifications. So most is, well, obviously the question came, is this certified? Yes, but it's more or less voluntarily self-certified, not it's certified by a third party, but Rabobank took the initiative to certify. So there's no independent market institution that can check the certification scheme. So this is something which will come and which will evolve in the future. So big institutions that will have that power and possibility, but this is something that should still develop. And then to be able to get to such an institution or entity, you will have to you will need agreement on definitions of, for example, deforestation. What is agroforestry? What is exactly a carbon reduction unit? Is that a commonly acceptable term? What is a ton of carbon? What is that? Permanence? What's the other one? I keep forgetting these terms. But
additionality, leakage.
Yeah. Exactly, buffer pool. So these are all defined, but it's all defined within, still within own silos. So there's not, like Paul mentions buffer pool now for Acorn. Probably if you go to another project, they most certainly will have a buffer pool, but the definition will be slightly different. So all the differences will have to be sorted out, and there will have to be some agreement or institute defining these terms and processes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Arjen, and I think there's a lot of initiative in this area by a lot of different institutes to try to reach those standards and standardizations and definitions, etc. I mean, what we are doing, we of course strongly believe in it, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to create what we call a high quality carbon removal unit, and we call it carbon removal unit because we believe it is something different than a carbon credit, because what we do is we actually take CO2 molecules out of the atmosphere, break them up, put the carbon in a tree and release the O2. That is something different than a carbon credit based on the traditional example is windmill in India. And so our carbon removal units cost somewhere between $25 and or upwards of that, whereas you can also buy a carbon credit for, I don't know, 20, 40, 80 cents. It's a completely different story. And the thing is, if you now read an annual report and a company says, I have compensated for all my carbon. And you don't know what they've done. Have they bought these poor quality carbon credits, or have they actually invested? And what you now see, and I think that's worth mentioning, is that there's companies stepping up, and that they want to know the origin, the source, the transparency. They want to know where it's from. They want to see proof. Our partner, by the way, that I haven't mentioned before, is Microsoft in all of this. So we've started this journey together with Microsoft, and they have super high standards for what they think is acceptable as a carbon removal unit. And they've bought our product. So that I think it makes us proud of, hey, we are doing something right. Anyway, so I completely agree with Arjen, and yeah.
Yeah, good points. I think it's really great to see how this market has already matured over the last couple of years, and now I think also with the more urgence that you see coming from a COP like discussions and also net zero commitments, I think it will be picking up quite quickly and accelerate. I think we are already getting some questions from the audience still coming in. So maybe one question is, in your experience, are investors willing to forgo profit by investing in smallholder agroforestry? Like, are there investors that want to do the right thing, so making the trade-off between like the regular financial performance versus maybe more like impact investing?
Yeah, I guess the example that I gave about Microsoft is a very good example, and I cannot disclose the name yet, but we have also closed a contract with another buyer, and what you see there is that they make conscious decisions. We want to invest in something that is good, because all of these companies, they also realize at some point, sooner or later, customers, suppliers, etc., are going to demand transparency and what choices have you made, and so the market luckily is finally putting pressure on these corporates to do what's right. Some may do it because they're forced, others may do it because they honestly believe in it. Either way, as long as they buy our carbon removal units. No, I'm just joking, but you know what I mean. And what is your buffer size as a percentage of all carbon removal units? We maintain a 15% buffer pool. Standard is a bit 10%, but we want it to be a bit higher, so we maintain a 15% buffer pool. And we can, if it turns out not to be enough, we can always increase or decrease.
Maybe if I can add shortly to Paul's observation of the sustainability investment. So what I personally see as well is that sustainability has been seen in business terms as a liability traditionally, very much as, for example, IT has been seen as a liability in the 80s. But now more and more businesses realize it's not a liability, it's an asset. So it's not a trade-off between sustainability and a profit. Sustainability is a condition to make a profit. So if you are not sustainable, you will be gone as a corporation. And this realization is now coming to life and to full maturity also in boardrooms and on strategic levels. So companies are making really strategic decisions, reallocating resources, and not just set up a PR position for a sustainability manager to do some greenwashing for sustainability, but it's getting to the core of companies. So for example, Rabobank, they just set up a whole carbon bank. So a whole business, I don't know what it's called, a business unit for a strategic decision to invest in sustainability. So I think the word trade-off is used maybe in the wrong context here. So it's in my view, it's a condition to be profitable in the future.
Nicely put, Arjen.
Yeah, I think we're moving into a more like long-term value perspective from both the corporate side and the investor side, and societal perspective. So I think the fact that you're actually putting a euro on carbon really helps in that sense as well, of course. I see another a bit more detailed and technical question. So I'll just read it out. I think it's mainly for Arjen. Is biomass monitoring enough to extrapolate carbon storage capacity? The land quality may also have an impact. So how is it possible to account for that? And if so, how do you do that with remote sensing?
Can I actually? Yeah.
Sorry, Paul. No, but let me also try to answer this. So the biomass monitoring is, in Acorn's view, And my answer, they look at the whole picture, and they said, okay, there are a few sources and sinks of biomass, of carbon, but first we're going to look at biomass because that's the most feasible and the most easiest to measure. And for the other ones, for example, atmospheric carbon and soil carbon, we're going to make assumptions. But those are candidates to go into dynamic monitoring and modeling in the future. So the question, biomass monitoring enough? No, not in itself, but it's a start of a bigger thing. So what you, in the end, it's the carbon cycle that you want to monitor. It's not just one element of the cycle. So you want to monitor the whole cycle. And this is also in the bank's vision. And can remote sensing play a role? Atmospheric carbon, most certainly. It's already being monitored. There's specialized satellites measuring carbon, greenhouse gases like carbon and methane. Soil is a bit more problematic, but I know we're also, or the project is also looking into indirect ways to look at, for example, soil moisture, if that can be a proxy for soil quality and quantity.
Yeah, maybe Arjen, to add to that, the way I read the question is, is biomass monitoring enough to extrapolate carbon storage capacity? And I think the answer to that is clearly yes, right? So yes. If we monitor the biomass and determine, hey, this is the volume of biomass that we're seeing, it is not all that difficult to extrapolate the actual carbon stored in that biomass.
No, sorry, no. In that sense, no. And again, here the emphasis more on measuring the difference, so the increase, rather than making a very accurate estimate of the absolute volume.
Yeah, and maybe to add to this question, what we do is we measure the biomass above the ground. So it's 5 tons of trees on a plot of land, and then there is equations that that you can use to determine that part of the tree that is situated below the ground. So we include a factor for that. But what we do not include in the carbon removal units that we sell is, as Arjen already mentioned, soil sequestration. It's a different story. We don't do that. It's purely biomass.
Great. I think, yeah, just for the sake of time, moving on to the next question quickly. There's a question around the buffer criteria. How is the 15% determined? Is it something that you can share, or is this a requirement from the certification scheme Plant Vivo?
So we made how we made the decision of 10 to 15%. So we looked at other parties in the market that are not doing exactly what we are doing, but something comparable. And they have similar percentages. And of course, we've discussed this with Plant Vivo and launching customers such as Microsoft. To be completely honest with you, the final decision, I was not a big part of that discussion. I would have to look into that for you to learn the nitty-gritty about that. But I guess it's not too far off from what I've said.
Great. Thanks a lot. I think we're nearing the end of the session. I think it's been quite an exciting topic to discuss, varying from very detailed technical questions to a bit more high level, role of this type of work in getting sustainability higher on the agenda. I think it was very valuable to hear your thoughts and to learn how you've been working on this. It's great to see the progress that's already made so far, and I think it will be great to stay in touch around this topic and to learn from the things that you are that you're innovating around, I think, in this field, which is very, very sensational, I think, for everyone that's excited about this topic. So I would like to thank you both for your contributions and the audience for their questions. Thanks for your participation. And you can sign up for the next 2 sessions. You can choose from 2 sessions, either investing in Western forestry or regenerative agriculture. Both seem to me very exciting topics, so I would have difficulty choosing. But yeah, I think this is it for now. And please feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions, I would say. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks for having us, Colette.